Joining us now to discuss is former GBI, or Georgia Bureau of Investigations agent Philip Price, the author of Self-Rescue, a Daniel Byrd adventure. Philip, thanks for being here tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. So before we get into some of your book, I want to ask you about your experience as a GBI agent. What years did you serve, and how big of a factor was the border in stopping the flow of illicit drugs?
So I served from 1978 to 2006. Spent over half of that time in drug enforcement specifically. So I came up through the times of the Miami Vice days when South Florida and South Georgia were being inundated with drugs from South America. And if you remember, during the Reagan administration, pretty much a Navy flotilla was put in place to stop some of the drugs coming across from South America. So, surprise, they started going through Mexico. And I've been involved with investigations on the Mexican border a number of times, have dealt with this issue over and over again.
So is it possible, given your experience, to separate the border crisis from the drug crisis that we currently find ourselves in?
No, because the vast, I would almost say 100%, but it's not quite that. But the largest percentage of drugs that are used in this country for recreational use come across the border from Mexico. And that's just a fact.
That's just a fact. I guess Chris Murphy, Senator Murphy, should be listening to just these facts, since he says he's such a factual and honest guy. But when you were doing some of these investigations, how cooperative or uncooperative were officials from some of these other nations in Central and South America?
Well, there was a political and economic advantage for them. So we didn't get a lot of cooperation. And frankly, even now, the Mexican government, because that's really what supports their economy, is not, in my experience, particularly cooperative. I'll just say that.
No, oh, go ahead.
That's just a reality of it. You can dance around it, you can try to paint it a different color, but that's the reality.
It really is, because again, when there's so much money involved, the incentives for people who don't have strong, moral backbones is, why stop it? There's no incentives to stop it. So it just makes the problem so difficult to deal with. And when the drugs come across into our border, whether they're just driven in or whether there's some other fancy maneuverings going on, does it seem like the way the drugs are being brought into our nation, that some of these drug traffickers, they seem to get more and more creative, it almost seems like, as time goes on?
Oh, absolutely. And that's their whole game, is they can be creative. They can find different ways. And I remember about 10 years ago, we had vehicles that were painted to look like service trucks from different industries that were used to bring drugs across the border and try to bring them across the country. And that was just one more trick of the trade. When I started, it was boats and airplanes. Now it's cars, but also humans. If you go to the border, there are people who cross every day, whether going to school or going to work, who can potentially have a vested interest in bringing drugs across because economically, or maybe threats to their family. So that sort of thing happens every day, and it's a game to the drug runners and to the human traffickers and the drug traffickers, because they have no skin in the game as long as they stay in Mexico.
And is it a head scratcher for you at this point? I know there's the political issue of the open border, but is it a head scratcher for you from a law enforcement position, how you can have even the top levels of the DHS, like Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, who, sadly was able to survive his impeachment attempt because the Senate helped him so much, Democrats in the Senate, I should say. But is it just mind-blowing to you that they have this data too? They know far more than we do, even, because there's a lot that's sensitive data that's not being released to the public, whether for political reasons or for actual national security reasons. And despite all that they know, they are working so hard to keep the border wide open, to be exploited left and right. Is that something that you just sit back and stare out pretty much in amazement, but not the good kind of amazement?